Thank you all for being here. My name is Ari Bargil, spelled A-R-I. Last name is B as in boy, A-R-G-I-L as in lady. I'm an attorney with the Institute for Justice and the lead counsel on this case. Before we get started, I'll give you a little bit of a sense for how we typically do this. I'm going to give a really brief introduction. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague who I'm joined with today, Andrew Ward. Andrew's my co-counsel on the case, and he'll give you a little bit more of an introduction into the specifics before introducing Jim Ficken, the gentleman who owns this property, which is subject to the foreclosure. And Jim will tell you from his personal standpoint more about what's going on. But if everybody's ready, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. My name is Ari Bargil. I'm an attorney with the Institute for Justice. The Institute for Justice is a national nonprofit public interest law firm. We're the nation's leading law firm for liberty. We represent clients in the courts of law and courts of public opinion in 4 core areas: freedom of speech, economic liberty, educational choice, and property rights. And it's that last pillar that we're here regarding today. Property rights. The Institute for Justice has litigated 6 cases in front of the United States Supreme Court, having won 5 of them. The most recent one, Timms v. Indiana, was decided recently in a unanimous decision for property rights. And in that case, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the excessive fines clause of the 8th Amendment applies to state and local governments, resolving an issue that had been lingering in constitutional law for quite some time. That means that what the city is doing to Jim here is unconstitutional. You'll hear more about the claims themselves, but in essence, nobody should lose their house for having tall grass. And that is what Jim is facing with the city's decision yesterday to move forward with the foreclosure. So with that, to give you more about the specifics and the chronology, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Andrew Ward, and then we'll hear from Jim. Andrew?
Good morning. My name is Andrew Ward, W-A-R-D, and I'm an attorney with the Institute for Justice. The city of Dunedin, Florida is trying to take this home, Jim Ficken's home, because the grass was too long. And that started last summer when Jim was away in South Carolina dealing with his late mother's estate. He'd hired someone to cut the grass while he was out, but that man unexpectedly died. And the grass did what grass does, and a code inspector saw that it was more than the 10 inches the city allowed, and Jim was officially on the hook for fines. When he got home 2 weeks later, he had no idea. He didn't receive any notice from the city. We mowed the lawn anyway, but it wasn't up to snuff for the code inspector, and the clock kept ticking, and the fines kept accruing. A month later is when the code inspector finally told Jim he'd be getting a big bill from the city. Now, at that point, Jim immediately went out. He went to Walmart. He brought a brand new lawnmower, and he cut the grass. He thought the fine might be $500. It was $500 per day. In total, the city fined Jim more than $29,000. That's close to what the average individual American makes in an entire year. And Jim is a 69-year-old retiree. He asked the city to reconsider, but it refused, and yesterday it voted to authorize foreclosure. Fortunately, Jim has the Constitution on his side. In February, the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the 8th Amendment prohibits cities from imposing excessive fines. And if anything is excessive, this is. The city could have just mowed the lawn and sent a bill. The Constitution requires that the punishment fit the crime. And this $29,000 foreclosure, that doesn't fit. That's why yesterday, Jim sued the city in court to protect his constitutional rights. And we're looking forward to a court ruling explaining that in America, you cannot lose your home because the grass was too long. Thanks. Jim?
Good morning. I'm Jim Ficken. When I got back into town at the end of July, I immediately cut the grass, and because I noticed it had grown too high, I've been having my friend cut the grass, and so after I got the grass cut, I immediately went by to see him and was told he had died unexpectedly. So I proceeded on dealing with issues down here. After a couple of weeks, this was in July and early August. And as you know, the rain and the summer weather makes the grass grow fast. So on 3 different occasions, after it rained and dried out, I tried to get the mower going and couldn't get it going. I started shopping for a used mower and didn't find anything reasonable. And on the Monday in August, the inspector dropped by as I was washing the car and said I'm going to get a big bill from the city. So I said, please don't take the pictures today. Let me have until tomorrow before you come and take the pictures of the grass. And he said, okay. So I immediately went out and found the only lawnmower that was available for immediate delivery, the last one at the Walmart, got it put together, got it out here, and got the grass cut. So a couple days later, I noticed a door hanger notice saying I'm supposed to come to a meeting of the Code Enforcement Board in about 2 weeks. Or a week or so, I'm not sure exactly the time frame there. And so I wrote a letter and hand-delivered it the next day asking for continuance because I was, my plane ticket had already been bought several weeks ago and it would cost several $100s to get it changed to stay in town for the meeting. So I spoke with them at that time on the Friday and gave them my written request for continuance or an ability to appear by telephone. I then wrote another letter and took it to them later that afternoon, but they were closed, so I stuck it on their door and emailed that to them when I got up to South Carolina, and then sent a third letter to them explaining the situation. They ended up having the hearing without me and set up the fines for the period, for 2 different periods, and it ended up totaling, like Andrew said, $28,500. When I left to go back up to South Carolina, I arranged for a different person to cut the grass in the first week in September, which he did. He said he was going to do it on Thursday. He didn't do it till Sunday. But anyhow, it was done. And so the inspector came out on Monday and said, yes, the grass is cut. But the inspector alleged that the grass had grown 10 inches in 10 days, which is impossible, really. And so that's where we are. The fines have been accruing, and the interest on the fines has been accruing, and now they're trying to take my house. You know, $28,000 is up to $30,000 now. Is even if I could get it, it's an excessive fine. And everybody I've spoken to says it's outrageous for being fined this amount for being tardy cutting your grass. It wasn't that I didn't cut. I wasn't trying to refuse what they were asking to do. I just didn't get it done according to their schedule.
All right, now. We're free to answer questions if you have any. If you want to do it here, if you want to separate out and do one-on-ones, we can do that also. But if you have any questions right now that you'd like us to answer at the mic stand, legal questions and questions about the lawsuit and stuff like that, you should direct either Andrew or me. And then questions about what's going on. So the facky stuff go to.
Have you put a proposal to them saying, look, we'll pay this or anything?
We've tried to communicate with the city attorney several times, and we just never got anywhere with it.
How long have you lived here?
About I've had the property for about 10 years. I've lived here probably about 3 years.
I imagine you like living here. Ever had any other issues with Dunedin? Is this like the first time you've ever had a real problem?
Well, in the past, especially since I've been spending most of the time away from here when it was vacant, they had sent notice that the grass had grown and to cut it by a certain date, and I got that done. I complied each and every time in previous occasions. But at one occasion 3 years ago, while I was up in South Carolina, they said it had to be cut by a certain date, and I communicated with them and said, look, I'll be down, explained to them while I was up there, and that I was taking care of my mom 55 days out of 60. I was only allowed 5 days every 2 months to come down here or to get respite from the hospice care. I explained to them I'd be down there soon, I would get it cut, and they had no response to it. So I got the grass cut before the date of the hearing, but after the date they specified that it had to be done. So they said, you're in violation, there's no fine, but you're now a repeat offender if you ever allow the grass to grow high again. And that was their reason for starting these fines and running them up for 7 weeks. At least 7 weeks before they even gave me notice that they were fining me $500 a day. So they just run up the fines, and it's $28,500 before you can really even find out that they're fining you.
Kind of a two-part question, but one, and maybe this goes to kind of you and the attorney. One, what do you think would be an appropriate fine, like an amount for grass not being cut? And do you also, furthermore, do you believe there should be a cap, like, at some point it gets to $1,000 and that's the cap, or you know what I mean?
Well, I've been told that in Palm Harbor, which is a county jurisdiction about 4 miles north of here, that the standard procedure for a case like mine would be that they would come out and cut the grass and give me a fine for, and send me a bill for $500.
And would that have been okay with you if they did that?
Yes.
I can answer the question. So as far as whether or not a limitless fine is appropriate or should have a cap, we are arguing in our lawsuit that limitless fines are in fact unconstitutional. If the city hadn't moved to foreclose in this case, for example, the fines would have continued to pile up and accrue and accrue and accrue until they could have eventually exceeded the value of the house and beyond. The Eighth Amendment requires cities to not impose excessive fines, and that means also fines that aren't limitless in nature and that also take into account a person's ability to pay. Jim is a 69-year-old retiree. He's on a very small fixed income. As Andrew said, $30,000 is as much as the average person makes in a year. It's simply outrageous. There's no constitutional justification for it, and we intend to vindicate that in court.
Let me ask you this. Have you guys seen other issues like this here in the city of Dunedin? Maybe not as extreme, but have there been issues like this before?
Since we started looking into this case, we've come aware of other instances in Dunedin involving some pretty outrageous fines. People, for one reason or another, were some of those cases are still pending, and Jim's is the one that grabbed us, I think, as the most outrageous of all of them. And it's important to note, though, that a victory for Jim wouldn't only be a victory for Jim. We're intending to secure a victory that would apply to people not just in Dunedin, but really in all of Florida and throughout the United States by getting a decision on the Eighth Amendment issue that we're bringing.
Do you think the ripple effect of this could be a lot further than just the Dunedin city limits?
We're prepared to take this all the way to the United States Supreme Court if that's what it takes.
Jim, question for you. I know you don't want to think this way, but if you were to lose this case, what do you do then? Because I mean, they're going to foreclose on your house. Like, what have you even thought about? What happens next?
I'm trying not to think about it, but I'll be booted out of this house and I'll have to find another place to live.
Do you have, are you by yourself? Do you have any family or anything here?
No, I'm by myself. I'm down to one sister now.
What did you do for a living before you retired?
Well, I had a variety of jobs and businesses. Some of my favorites were a business called Entertainment Systems, which was a booking agency and concert promotions. I did concert promotions in college. Another one was Video Values. This was back when video equipment was very expensive and big and boxy, and people would hire you to come out and take a video of their wedding or their soccer playoff or a legal deposition. And so that was an interesting business for a while, and I was able to get a little bit of publicity on that by being the only camera crew to show up for a state soccer championship. Probably the longest running business was Computer Solutions and PC Solutions, which was a basic, what they call a value-added reseller for computers. I assembled custom computers, did training, repairs, all that sort of stuff. My favorite job probably was working as a reporter and producer for WGST News Radio in Atlanta. Also, I was lucky enough to be selected to be an extra in about a dozen feature films and various TV productions. So that was fun learning how the movie business works. So just a variety of things.
And you said when you got home initially from taking care of your mother, you did cut the grass, but the issue arose again because you were unable to find a lawnmower after that, and the person who normally takes care of your lawn had died.
You sort of got it backwards.
Okay.
You know, when I came back, I was up in South Carolina for June and the first part of July, and I'd called Russ, left messages a couple times, make sure you cut the grass, and never heard back from him. And then when I got back down here on July 20th, or July 19th or 20th, I noticed the grass was high, and that's when I immediately cut it and went by to see Russ, and it was formed. Russ died. And so then the second time, first of all, they didn't even acknowledge that I cut the grass in July. They said, "Oh, you know, it's been too high for the whole time period." And then when I did get the grass cut, when I received notice from the inspector stopping by that I was going to get a big bill, and got the grass cut then on I believe that was August 21st, and I arranged for the grass cutter to come by the first week in September, which would have been about 15 days, 12 days, something like that, after that period. But the inspector came by and said that as of August 31st, 10 days later, it had already grown up to past 10 inches, which is, you know, incorrect.
How tall was
When I found it in July, it was probably, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 inches, something like that.
We're not contesting that Jim's grass was never in excess of 10 inches tall. Just that losing your home for that is a little bit outrageous and unconstitutionally excessive.
How did you get hooked up with these lawyers?
Well, I just was seeking for help anywhere, so I was just looking on the internet for any kind of cases dealing with excessive fines or property rights or those kinds of things, and I ran across the case that they handled from the fellow whose truck was confiscated for a minor crime, and that some arguments had recently seemed to go in the favor of his case that an excessive fine should not apply to, or should apply to things other than federal jurisdictions. But I'm getting into the legal weeds there, so.
Well, he pretty much covered it. The case is Timms v. Indiana. That's the case that we recently won unanimously at the United States Supreme Court, which held essentially that the Eighth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is applicable to state and local governments.
Jim, did you ever think in a million years that you'd have this issue over your grass?
No. I'm just shocked that this is happening.
How are your neighbors been? Supportive or?
Well, I'm not really sure. I really don't communicate to any great degree with them. But the ones I have talked to said that, a fine like this is outrageous.
Were you aware that they would fine you? Did you know about that beforehand?
No, that's the whole key. They were running the fines for 7 weeks before they took the time to send a letter out saying, oh, by the way, we've been fining you, So they sent the letter out on August 22nd or 23rd. And of course, I didn't receive it till I got back into town in the middle of September. But they basically said, oh, we've been fining you since July 4th or 5th, something like that.
Was the entire yard grown up or just a portion of it?
Pretty much the entire yard.
Maybe for the attorneys, I guess lastly, in summary here, if there's other people in a similar situation or finding themselves being fined excessively for something they, maybe not necessarily their fault, like what should they do?
The Institute of Justice has a form to fill out where you can explain your situation and see if they'll help you.
Can you top that?
That's why the Institute for Justice exists. We are a nonprofit public interest firm that protects people's property rights from government abuses. And if something like this has happened to you, we would be happy to hear about it.
When you moved in, did you have any indication, how did you know what the rules were?
I'm not really sure I understand what you mean.
Like as far as how high the grass can be?
I had no idea. I didn't find that out until, I reviewed the statutes and what their claims were.
Fair to assume that you haven't ever let your grass get that tall before, like when you're home?
When I'm home, I never have, but there have been times when I was away where it would sometimes start getting to that height that they would send a notice saying, get it cut in 2 weeks or something, and I was always able to comply
I'm saying when
with
you're
it.
here, you normally cut the grass.
Oh yes,
Usually like everybody else.
I'm probably not going to be doing it in the future. I've developed some arthritis, so I'm probably getting pretty close to retiring from grass cutting, except for emergencies.